welcome to Project Kin's Emma Explores. I'm Barbara Tien, your ringleader here at Project Kin, where we are a community of family historians hooked on stories. I keep Project Kin independent and free. We are focused on the inspiring creativity and encouragement we need to tell our family stories. And as part of that, I am always delighted to welcome Emma Cox to our community here. Emma is a professional genealogist, author, and podcaster with Journeys into Genealogy. And she joins us here on the last of her first year as our guest host for Emma Explores. And with that, I'll step out of the way and turn it over to you, Emma. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And I cannot believe it's been a year already. That has gone so quickly. I really enjoy doing these because it's sharing my own family history, but it's sharing how I've done it. And it always makes me look back. So to do it, I actually will do a bit more research and I'll find out something new or something interesting, which I can include, which is always great fun. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. Here we go. So today I'm going to be talking about a guy called James Blatch Cox and his family. Let's just move you all out of the way so I can see everything okay. So for anybody who doesn't know me, my name's Emma Cox, and as Barbara said, I'm a family historian and genealogist. I help people find out about their ancestors, put together trees. I love doing things to do with DNA, taking people on tours or helping organise tours, finding living relatives, all sorts of different things. I have my podcast, Journeys into Genealogy, where there's over nearly 110 episodes on there now of all sorts of different things. So if you haven't listened, please do go and have a look at it. Today, we are going to be talking about a gentleman called James Blatch Cox, and he lived in Falmouth in Cornwall. Now, Falmouth is quite significant in terms of movement of people, because it was one of the places that people used to leave England from to go abroad. So that could have been to go to the Americas, or it could have been to go out into Europe. And some of his ancestors, or some of his descendants rather, they actually did go abroad, and I'm going to mention them a little bit later in the talk. So these are a couple of pictures I found of him. Very fancy beard in the first one there, and his beard is a little bit bigger actually, and whiter in the photograph where he's older on the right-hand side. So James was born in 1801, and he is an iron founder, a lay preacher, a mayor, and my 4 times great-grand-uncle. And he was born in a place called Taunton in Somerset, the 9th of 12 children of William Cox and Grace Goodenough Blatch. I do love looking at this side of my family because there are some fantastic names you find in amongst all of these different ones. So Goodenough is an amazing one, and Blatch, and I've got Orchard and Sweet Apple and all sorts of other ones. And I've got Cox and Fox and all sorts of things together. So he's number 9, and I just wanted to show you where he fits in with everybody else. So his first sibling is William Charles. So he's an iron founder. He was born in 1786, and he's my descendant, my ancestor rather. Then there was one called Henry, who unfortunately died young. And then there's Grace, Marianne, George, Robert, Elizabeth Grace, Elizabeth Blatch, who unfortunately also died young. And then James himself, Joseph Goodenough, Maria Goodenough, and Edward Wall, and again he died young. So you can see some of them, they lost 4 children when they were very young, but all of the others did actually survive to adulthood and had families themselves. So James married a lady called Harriet Newberry on the 26th of September in Taunton, and they had 9 children, all born somewhere near Taunton. Hatch Beecham is the place that they were actually born. So I just wanted to show you some of their family. So they started off with Anna. She was born in 1829, followed by James Blatch, and he was known as James Blatch Cox in 1832. Newberry, Harriet, Elizabeth, Joseph Goodenough, Samuel Blatch, Henry Herbert, Ellen Maria. And so we have 9 children there. So you can see the names carry on where people are taking the mother or the grandparents' surnames so that the surnames don't die out. What I also wanted to show you is where some of these people ended up and the kind of families that they had. So Anna, the eldest one, married a man called James Rodier, and she had 11 children. So bear in mind, she's one of 9. She went on to have 11. James married Ellen Wilkinson, and he had another 9. Newberry, he married twice, and he only had one son by his first marriage, and his name was James Newberry Cox, and he went to British Columbia in California. Second time round, he married a lady called Elizabeth Batting and had another 7 children. So you can see the number of children is mounting up here. Harriet married a Reverend Johns and moved to the USA, so she was in New York State, and she had one son. His name was William Morley Johns. Elizabeth married Nathaniel Fox. So Elizabeth Cox married Nathaniel Fox. Not changing your name very much when you're doing that. They had 11 children and they stayed in Falmouth, but some of the others moved over England. Now, Joseph Goodenough married Celia Kelway, and they had 18 children between them. Can you imagine that? 18 pregnancies? That is an amazing achievement. 5 died young. And of those 2 children, 2 of them married Cox cousins. So if you try and do the family trees, there were lots of interconnections and everything. So it took a little bit of sorting out this one here. Samuel married a Cordelia Solomon, and they had 10 children. So this is the line where the majority of them went to America. So 4 of them went to the USA. Edward Blatch Cox, William Charles Cox, and Henry Bernard went to Pittsburgh, and Ada Lillian went to Philadelphia. Finally, we have Ada, who married Anna Maria Cuff, and she had 9 children. So 4 of them died young. So you can see between them, that must have made some pretty large family gatherings. Okay, anyone like to take a guess as to how many grandchildren there might have been? No? Oh, sorry, we've got Ellen and William Henry Solomon, brother to Cordelia, another 8 there. So we've got a lot of children there. So wait for it, 85 grandchildren. Can you imagine trying to remember their names, presents, birthdays, family gatherings? You couldn't get everybody together in the same room, because you've got 85 grandchildren. You've probably got another 20 parents alongside that, grandparents, and that's just one branch of the family. You're looking at over 100 people there. And I just thought, when I was doing this, that fact really stood out to me. So I just wanted to I think probably be a bit grateful that nowadays we don't have families quite that large.
Can you comment on the relative wealth to support an extended family like that?
Well, they were a family of business people, so they were quite significant in the community. So he was an iron founder. The other families, one of them was a Quaker family, so that was Nathaniel Fox came from quite a famous Quaker family, and they all basically supported each other. I think they were obviously knew each other really well, because some of the children married each other and things like that. So I think it was to do with trade. They had businesses, they employed lots of people. I'm going to go into that a little bit more a bit later on, so you can see how that develops. But I just thought the fact that they had 85 grandchildren between them, I've not come across anything like that. If anyone can beat that, I'd love to know. So he started off in Taunton before he moved to Falmouth. And the 1822 Pigot's Directory shows him in the High Street in Taunton with an ironmonger's shop. So that would have been selling goods for people to use in their house, so pots and pans and all sorts of things like that. Oh, and it should say 1830s, he diversifies into other businesses. So he has James Blatch Cox and Company, and they are the West Somerset Wine Vaults and Agency from 1838 to 1839, based in Taunton. Now, I can't quite understand this, but basically from these adverts that I found from the local newspapers, it seems like they were very happy to run a business which was wine and spirits, but they also dealt in property. And it seemed to be quite common for people to have more than one business in the same area. So in these adverts here, they respectfully inform the nobility, gentry and families that their cellars are open daily from 10 till 4 for the inspection of their extensive stocks. So wine, spirits, beers and porters. and they guarantee them as genuine as imported. And I do like this: a small quantity of Madeira wine on hand, suited for invalids, warranted to have been 11 years in bottle. And then immediately, gentlemen desirous of letting or selling properties will find it advantageous to apply at these offices for this purpose. And they have several pieces of freehold land for sale. And it seems slightly extraordinary to us nowadays that you would have two completely different things in the same advertisement like that. But it's not a one-off, as you can see from the other ones on the other sides of the page here. So the middle one, I do like this. It's got cognac champagne brandy, which has been 41 years in bottle, having been imported into this country in the year 1798, invaluable either as a medicine or a treat for a friend. And then it goes on to say they're agents for Guinness. And then on the next one, he's still the Somerset Wine Vaults and Agencies, and he's again an agent for Guinness. And they've got several houses to let, with and without land, in Taunton and the surrounding areas. And several sums from £50 to £5,000 ready to be advanced on good security. So that seems to also indicate that they're actually lending money to people for different purposes as well. So this is sort of slightly strange, but obviously he did this for several years, and then he decided, well, alongside that or whatever, he was actually, just carry on here, a Baptist minister. So I'm not quite sure how you sort of reconcile being somebody who sells lots of alcohol and somebody who is quite religious. It doesn't say he was anything to do with the temperance movement or anything like that, but it talks about him being a lay preacher, and the fact that he was a lay preacher in the Baptist Church at Taunton, and his ministry at Creech led to a Sunday school and a chapel, and he left Bridgewater for Hatchbeacham, and the congregation grew, and he gave up his post when he embraced the beliefs of the Plymouth Brethren. So the Plymouth Brethren, they're quite strict, and I've actually done some IT work years ago for people who are Plymouth Brethren, and they don't really drink, and they keep to themselves, and they're very closed society. So the fact that he did that was very strange. And then I came across another announcement where this is actually about someone else's death, but it mentions his James Blatch Cox as being his grandfather, and that he said that after leaving Hatch went to Falmouth, where he left the ministry over some point of doctrine or theology, a common experience in that age, and set up in business. He flourished exceedingly and was mayor of Falmouth 4 times. So he's gone from being an ironmonger, selling wines and spirits and dealing in property, being a preacher, and then he goes off to Falmouth and he's mayor amongst other things when he's in Falmouth. So there's lots of different strings to his bow, as you might say. So he moved to Falmouth around 1842, and in the census he's age 50 and working as a master ironmonger, and has a staff of 9 people working for him. By 1961, he's moved outside Falmouth, so a place called Burdock, and he's working as the manager of the waterworks. So he was very heavily involved in the construction of the waterworks for the town of Falmouth. So he did that for many years, and basically was involved in the construction and actually the running of it once it was actually functioning. By 1870, he's age 70 and still working, and he's the manager of the waterworks at that point. So in 1846, he was elected mayor of Falmouth, and I thought it's just quite interesting to just show you this article here. And because you might think that being mayor was something that people would definitely want to do, but if you look at this one here, it says Falmouth Town Council, Monday being the day for the election of a mayor for the ensuing year. The council met at the usual hour, 11 o'clock, and after the preliminary business had been gone through and a scrutiny was taken, when it was found that Mr. James Harriet Lake, bookseller, stood at the head of the poll. Mr. Lake, however, declining to take the office, paid the fine consequent on the refusal, viz. £30, I think that is, or 30, that sounds like a lot of money. Mr. James Blatch Cox, ironmonger, was elected in his stead. So even if you were elected, it doesn't necessarily mean that you went ahead to actually do that. And there must have been a good reason why Mr. Lake decided he didn't want to do it, and that James Blatch Cox decided that he did instead. So he was elected for the first time in 1846. He was then re-elected in 1847 and 1854. Now, on that previous newsletter article, it did say that he'd been elected 4 times, but I could only find a reference to 3 here. And this is actually talking about the mayor's chain. I don't know if you have these things in other countries, but in this country, people have quite a significant chain that a mayor will wear as a badge of their office around their neck, with generally some sort of large pendant at the bottom of it. And this is actually engraved with the names of the previous mayors on it. So in this, it says James Blatch Cox, 1846, 47, and 54. And then it goes on. And some of the people actually in here are actually other members of the family as well. So William Henry Solomon is actually his, I can't remember exactly, is his daughter's brother-in-law, if I remember that correctly. And I believe that John Chesterfield Downing could also be another relation there. And then between 1853 and 1860, he was involved with the build of the waterworks and continued as manager. And this seemed to have been a job that was handed down through the generations. So one of his sons and his grandsons also continued as the manager of the waterworks in subsequent decades. And another thing, he was then an agent in 1870 for the Norwich Union Fire Insurance Society. So he did a lot of different things during his career. So in 1874, sadly, he died. And in later years, he'd been living with his daughter, one of his younger daughters, Anna Blatch Cox. And she was actually mentioned in his will. She was actually the first person mentioned in his will for getting an extra £50 for actually living with him and looking after him. He died on the 29th of March and is buried in Swanpool Cemetery. Excuse me. So this is his obituary that I found in the Falmouth Express. So he was elected to the town council, proved himself a zealous and useful member, and within 5 years of settling was elected chief magistrate, twice afterwards elected to the mayoralty, and the interests were looked after well during his 3 years of office. He looked after the waterworks, and the management of the company's affair won for him the confidence of the shareholders and the goodwill of the consumers. And he had resigned active business life for some time before his decease, having been succeeded at his large ironmongery establishment in Market Street by his son-in-law, Nathaniel Fox. In this extensive firm of Cox and Sons, ship chandlers and smiths at the quay, and at the Docks Foundry, being in the hands of his enterprising sons, Messrs. J.G. and H. Cox. So what I hadn't mentioned in there is there was another business going along alongside this, which to do with shipbuilding or the management of the docks, the setting up of the docks, all to do with ships around there. The deceased gentleman was esteemed as an upright man of business, a good citizen, and an exemplary Christian. His funeral took place at the cemetery on Good Friday and was attended by a large number of the inhabitants, including the mayor and members of the corporation. And the service was conducted by the Reverend Gooch, pastor of the Baptist Church. So obviously, if he had a falling out with the Baptist Church prior to this point, he'd obviously made up by the point of his death, and he actually had a Baptist funeral. So the story doesn't end here. So I thought we'd just share a little bit of information about Cox & Co, engineers and shipbuilders. So there are 2 sons here. I'm just going to go back one here. Sorry, just go back one. Joseph Goodenough Cox and Henry Herbert Cox set up a shipbuilding and engineering business with 2 of their cousins, Herbert Henry Cox and Walter Resi Cox. So you've got Henry Herbert and Herbert Henry, who are first cousins. And it's just trying to look through these things. You've got to be very careful with the records. And over time, they built nearly 200 vessels in Falmouth. And there are other adverts, but they did the vessels, but they did the engines. They did all sorts of different things there. And they basically did they are in themselves quite an interesting group of people, the next generation, because I came across things where it talked about one of them being a consul for Chile as in the country. So he was the local representative for Chile in Falmouth. So when the boats came up from South America, he would have been the person that dealt with all the correspondence for that particular one. And we visited Falmouth a couple of years ago. And if you go into the Maritime Museum there, which is highly well worth visiting, they actually have the mentions on there, and Cox and Chile and different places and different people. So the brothers and cousins continued working together. And this is just a picture of showing you what the dry docks at Falmouth looked like. But in 1901, the partnership changed. So the undersigned Joseph Goodenough Cox, Herbert Henry Cox, and Walter Wesley Cox has been dissolved. And then it's being reinstated under a different ownership with Henry Herbert, Walter Resi, Ernest Goodenough, Alfred and William Downing Cox. So this is a mixture of brothers and cousins of different types, changing businesses. And then the descendants who went to the US and Canada. So James Newberry Cox, he emigrated and became a farmer. And he had 6 children, but only 2 of them actually went on to have their own families. In the US, his cousins, Edward Blatch Cox, went to Pittsburgh and he became a salesman. And if I remember correctly, I think it was a salesman for a bakery. And he had 5 children, one of whom was a missionary to Guatemala, and lots of descendants. Henry Bernard Cox went to Pennsylvania and he was also a salesman, and he must have moved and he actually died in Florida. 2 children, 11 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren mentioned on his obituary. So they had relatively large families again for the next generation. Ada Lillian Cox married William Frederick Mariner and they went to Philadelphia. So I think these people all kept in touch with each other. They had 3 children and 6 grandchildren. And when I had my DNA tests results back over the years, I've actually got matches with some of her descendants. And her brother, William Charles Cox, went to Pittsburgh again, and he became a photographer, 2 children and 5 grandchildren. And finally, amongst the ones who went over to America, William Morley Johns was actually born in New York around 1872, and he worked for the US Navy. And again, I've got DNA matches from his line. I just wanted to share a couple of photographs with you because I was very fortunate that a couple of years ago, one of my relatives, Robin Cox, he's actually a descendant of this line, and he doesn't have any children himself, and his brother didn't have any children, and he didn't know what to do with his research. And I said, well, I would love to have it if you're happy to share it with me. So basically, he sent me loads and loads of information. So this is one of his photographs. So this is Edward Blatch Cox's family in 1918. And then the missionaries that I mentioned earlier on, I love this one because it's got the mother and 3 children on the same passports. I'm not sure if they even do that sort of thing nowadays. I think that babies pretty much have their own passports from the year dot. But I seem to remember when we were young, we were included on adult passports before we had our own. This one, it actually says all the different things on here. It tells you how old the children are and everything. And I thought it's a lovely photograph of all of them together. So what helped me in my own research? Well, Grace's Guide, they're very good. I've mentioned them before. They're engineers and things like that. If you've got people who are anything to do with engineering in the UK, they're likely to be mentioned in Grace's Guide. Again, the British newspaper article, they have loads and loads of interesting things on there, and that's where the majority of the newspaper articles came from. Distant cousins who compiled ancestry trees. So this is where I've gone online and actually found other trees there. So there's a lady called Pam Cox who's out in British Columbia somewhere, can't remember exactly where, and some of the information that she shared with me. And I actually started sharing information with her prior to Ancestry and prior to doing anything of this. And we actually exchanged letters, and then it went to emails and CDs and all sorts of things. Lost contact for many years, and then recently have got back in touch again. The local newspaper is always a good source of information. So the Falmouth Packet in this case. So that was actually, I don't know whether that was by the British Newspaper Archive, whether that was doing a direct search for a particular person's name on Google, and that came up in the results. Wikitree. So Wikitree, if you ever look at it, they seem to have got some sort of, I don't know whether it's person created or AI created, but they seem to put stories together around different people. So there were a couple of ones on there. So James Blatch Cox was one, and that, well, I think one of his children was also mentioned on there. And that's where I got the article saying about him being a Baptist minister and falling out with somebody. So that came from someone else's research, I believe. And a final thanks to Robin, who gave me all his research, because it was amazing looking through it and finding loads of photographs. And there's tons more of information here that I haven't included in here, but I've got that. I can actually go back and have a look. So that's it for today. So any questions?
Fabulous. I always love the way your so many of your stories pick up from the late 18th century into the 19th century, which so delightfully correlates with the Industrial Revolution in so many of the areas from Scotland down into England, and the ironmonger and the role of the ironmonger in this innovation of machines and trade and shipments is always an eye opener of sort of real life history lived by real people who are connected to real people. It's a delight. Thank you.
I did like the 85 grandchildren.
That's kind of breathtaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you have to think that in religious families that have just by definition a lot of children, there must be a lot of that sort of thing, as well as naming traditions that keep the Henry the.
And there were a lot of good enoughs where it went down through or Blatch as it went down through the different generations there.
The Fox Cox family.
Yes.
Actually, here's a question for you. Are there rules? I know that it just seems as an American that I am more familiar with British names if I hear someone named Smith Jones or, those kinds of hyphenated names that have been carried on. Is that, how does that work? Is that a tradition?
Some people, if they are the last of their line or something like that, it might be that they didn't want the name to die out, so they would hyphenate it. It might be that sometimes the woman didn't want to lose her name in some ways. Sometimes they were actually asked to put the name or even change the name completely because of wills, inheriting money, that sort of thing. So you could actually, I did that in one of my previous ones where he was Edward Drew Hodges and he became, trying to remember what he changed his name to, but basically to inherit money from his grandparent, he had to actually change his surname so that there wasn't anybody else with the name to actually ensure it carried on.
Oh, I see.
Would that have been more common, Emma, with the, how should we say, not the coal mining crowd, but the higher classes, that there'd be that? Speaking as a descendant of a coal miner, that we didn't have hyphenated names. Most of us didn't even, I got one, most don't even have middle names, but.
I don't have a middle name. No, my name is my name. So that's literally it, really short. Hyphenated names, I come across them. And one of the things I also come across is the different spelling of names. So you might have somebody who has a middle name and a surname, and sometimes they're hyphenated, sometimes they're not. So you're never actually sure what their surname is because it varies in the different records. So you might have a Blatch Cox, or it might be a Cox. It might be James Blatch and then his surname is Cox, or it might be James Blatch space Cox as a surname, or it might be James Dash Cox as a surname. So those are all possibilities. So and the records vary, and it's always a bit of a mystery and a puzzle trying to put things together and thinking, well, I believe that this is the one that's been used most frequently, so this is the one that I'm choosing to use.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask a question. Did the good enoughs that went to BC, do you know where they went to?
Hang on a minute. I've got to remember who it was, went where. That was James Newberry Cox. He went to British Columbia. So hang on, I'll just dig out my tree. Give me one moment. So he's my second cousin 4 times removed. And he went to Courtney in the Cornish Valley.
Okay.
I don't know if that's anywhere that you do it. Essendale is where one of his children died. Central Thanet.
It's on the
Rapid
coast.
City, Manitoba. That must have been on the way across.
Where was that?
Rapid City, Manitoba.
Oh, I think that was a stopping off like for quite a few people. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just having a look at the next generation down, see where they end up. Duncan, British Columbia. Yeah, one David Howard Cox is his son, so his family seem to have been in Duncan.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Wow, that
I
made
have no
me
idea where any of those places are, by the way. I'm sure you probably do, but
Well, quite a few are on the West Coast, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
The good enough I knew, they lived in Kimberley, BC, and when my husband knew them. Yeah.
I do have DNA matches to good enoughs, and I can't remember which countries they're in at the moment, but it's certainly over that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bill Butcher has added here that although they apparently were salesmen to some of your descendants, there was the attraction to Pittsburgh based on its steel and iron industry, which was especially strong in the late 19th century. That's an interesting insight.
Yeah, I think that's probably quite a likely story, because if that's what they were familiar with, the industry that they were familiar with, that they might have gone over there based on that, and may or may not been able to get a job and then gone for something else.
Right. Or investments that they brought over and then started, businesses around that.
Yeah.
As you described this, I was suddenly flashed on how, we in family history so often focus on family trees as a structure, a framework to do our research against. Is anyone aware of a tool that would allow you to take what you know from a family tree and apply it to a map?
There's different things. I know that DNA Painter, Johnny Pearl has just launched a thing where you can see people on a map with that.
Mm-hmm.
There is some software that I bought a while ago that I've never managed to actually work. And the one thing that you have to work out with all of these things is the actual naming conventions of the places. So Ancestry has this way of putting in, for example, I was brought up in a place called Nutley, which is in East Sussex in England, but they want to put it in as find a grave, put it in as Wealden district. Now, Wealden district doesn't exist. Nobody ever refers to it as Wealden district. Wealden is a local council area, and the council is Wealden, but we would never say Wealden district in an address or anything like that. So Ancestry always wants to force you to put these extra things in there. Though in a lot of places, the names will actually be incorrect. They're not names that would be recognized if somebody was actually looking for that place. So if you're trying to find it on a map, if a system was trying to find it on a map, it wouldn't work. So that's one of the little bugbears I have with Ancestry. That is one of the serious bugbears I have with Ancestry about that one. But you should be able to plot things. I mean, if you want to, you could create your own Google Maps. That is something I have done in the past. So you can sign up and you can create layers. So that's sometimes really useful. You can put pins down for different people in different family lines as different colors, or however you want to do it. I've done that for clients as well as other things, and see how things relate together. So that's a good way of doing it. But I'm not aware of an easily accessible or easy to use tool that will do maps. If there is, I would love it, because I think it'll be so useful.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the interface of Old Maps Online. I think that's the site where there's a time scroll down at the bottom, and you can scroll back and forth and see different maps overlaid onto a generic map to see how a place was described at a time. And it occurs to me that it'd be really interesting to see where people in your family tree were at different points in time, scrolling back and forth.
The thing is, you have to go through and clean your tree.
Oh,
You have to go
absolutely.
through and make sure that all the actual addresses in there are correct. And that's one of
Yeah.
the things I do like with Family Tree Maker, is that I can actually do place reports and things on that, and it will show me where I've got something spelt incorrectly or something, or where it's not quite right. And so I can actually, if I want to, go through and edit things. Trouble is, when you've got a lot of people on there and you've got a lot of records, it is a lot of work to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, to
And
me,
Ancestry do have something where they're mapping. I'm not sure that much about how it works, but there is something on Ancestry about mapping.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In the world of data, being able to use the same data and thus look at it different ways is just so incredibly powerful. And I tend to think that as more and more money comes from industries that are relating to doing this, and that core technology exists from using it in other environments, it will come here. But you're absolutely right. Garbage in, garbage out. Taking the time to get that kind of data right. And you only get that kind of data right by looking at it different ways and having it spot the errors and inconsistencies.
And one thing you've really also got to remember is places change over time. So the name, where they are, what region they're part of, that if they're part of one council, they move to another council, they move to a different country. There's all sorts of different things there. So which one do you use?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. Here in the United States, in our history from, you know, the founding, this big chunks of land of changing names, and, you know, very official names, but they were completely different. You know, Virginia, West Virginia, for example, and Indiana, and so on. Yeah, fascinating.
I've got relations in a place called Cumberland, which doesn't exist anymore. So that's now Cumbria, but the boundaries are different. So you've also got to check that not just the place name has changed, but the boundaries where they are and how that relates to the time period you're looking at and how that relates to now.
Yeah, yeah. And you're not going to find latitude, longitude markings for where someone was born. Except maybe where you have buildings that still are standing that you might very well have in Britain.
I did a project a few years ago with the National Library of Scotland maps, and it was the Roy map of 1700s, one of the first maps of Scotland. And basically what we were doing is side by side you had the old place names and the new place names, and the idea was to work out whether they existed and to basically put what the new place name to link them together. So if somebody was going to look for them, this is where they would look for them. Obviously that map, the scale of it and the places of it was a very approximate guide to what it was, but it was very interesting to see what did exist in those days and what had disappeared. And
yeah. Oh, the National Library of Scotland, which, just to put a plug in for one of your journeys into genealogy episodes with Chris Fleet, as I recall, and you were kind enough to introduce me to him. I just that their collection is so extraordinary, and the tools to leverage them, and it's global in terms of the kinds of things that are available, but also just inspires you to ask different kinds of questions to see what could be done and where it might go. Do we have other questions, other comments we want to add here? I'll add one more little plug for another speaker of yours, or I believe a person that you interviewed was the gentleman who has the Substack on London. Remind me of his name.
Matt Brown.
Matt Brown,
Londonist.
Right?
Matt Brown of Londonist.
Yeah. An extraordinary Substack, and inspiring again in so many ways. Certainly, if any of us have ancestors who happen to have been or around or visited, or let's just go explore corners of London, it's great fun. And of course, we have such an accessible common language to a place that has so much history in the same location. It is a reminder that yes, all these places were also still there in the 4th century, but what of recorded history do we have to explore? And okay, maybe not the 4th century, but the 12th century, we might very well have some really interesting artifacts. Good stuff. Well, thank you, everyone. As you know, as Project Kin, we share all of these recordings. You'll find this one up at projectkin.org/Emma-explores, because that one is hyphenated. And stay tuned for next month when Emma will be back to explore. Do you have any tips for us as to where you might be going that time, next month?
Rosalinda.
Rosalinda.
Rosalinda, yes. I'm going to be exploring Rosalindas.
Ah, how many Rosalindas fit on the head of a pin?
Or Great Aunt Rosa and Rosalinda.
Yeah, lovely, beautiful names. And again, back to naming traditions. Maybe we ought to bring in the discussion naming traditions from our families to discuss as well.
Definitely, yeah.
All righty. Thank you all. Thank you so much. And stay tuned for the recording as well. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.